When Heidi asked me to come up to speak to you, an invitation, by the way, for which I'm grateful and honored, I thought, what am I going to say to what is largely, I believe, a group of parents and loved ones of people with ADHD? And so she wanted me to do something a little new and a little different. And I sat down and I said, what ideas would I want any family that we had seen in our clinic to understand by the time we had finished working with that family, by the time we'd finished the evaluation and the counseling of that family, what would be the 30 take-home ideas? I tried to reduce it to 10, by the way, but that's just not possible. And 30 was even a bit of a struggle. There's another 30 I left out. But I think of these as sort of the touchstone ideas that a family needs to understand if they really are going to appreciate both the nature of this disorder in a child and what it means for the raising and management of that child successfully. So we're going to have some fun with this because I've not done this presentation in this way ever before, and you may advise me never to do it again. So we'll see. Obviously, the first idea is to know the disorder, and we begin at a very elementary stage of this disorder. This is a developmental disability. That is the first thing you need to understand. A disability of what? There are two psychological traits that are not developing in this child on time. So let's clarify that. A developmental disability means that you are showing age-inappropriate behavior. It doesn't mean that your behavior is pathological. It just means it's not appropriate for your age. So understand one thing. ADHD is different from normal in a quantitative way, not a qualitative way. Developmental disorders differ from psychopathologies. A psychopathology is a gross aberration in your behavior that we can recognize at any age. If you are bipolar, if you are schizophrenic, if you have major depression, we don't need to adjust the criteria for your age because those are grossly abnormal conditions. Autism would be another one. Those are not developmental disabilities. A developmental disability is a delay in the rate of a normal trait. What distinguishes this child from other children who don't have the disorder is the degree of the delay. They will go through the same stages that others would go through in normal development, but not at the same time. And when these traits reach their ultimate maturity, which, by the way, is your early 30s, the person with ADHD will be leveling off at a degree well behind that of where the general population has leveled off in that trait. Now, what is it that is delayed? Two traits. The first is not the one after which the disorder is named. In that sense, the disorder has been misnamed. The first deficit to appear is inhibition, a failure to develop appropriate inhibition of your behavior. And this will often emerge in the preschool years. And its first sign is usually hyperactivity, though it doesn't need to be so. But it typically is. You have an individual who is behaving too much, who is not suppressing irrelevant behavior the way other children are able to do. We will see this in their motor actions. There's a lot of action coming out of this child. We will see it in their verbal behavior. There's a lot of words coming out of this individual. And we will see it in their intrusive and disruptive motor and verbal behavior as well. But along with that, there is a cognitive impulsiveness, this snap decision-making, this quickness to do the first thing that pops into your head without due delay and due diligence, thinking about what the consequences will be. And then we will also see the restlessness, not just the gross motor activity, but the seat restlessness, which I think affects their school performance more than the gross motor activity does. But this will decline with age, so that is why hyperactivity is no longer the name of this disorder, because it declines steeply, and by adolescence it's nearly gone, and by adulthood it's an internal state. It's a feeling inwardly of a need to be busy and doing multiple things. And it's a busyness of one's mind, one's ideas. There is a restless quality to their cognition. but not to their outward behavior. In fact, our research has shown that hyperactivity is of no diagnostic value in adulthood. In fact, being restless is more associated with anxiety disorders by the time you're 30 than it is being associated with ADHD. We just don't pay attention to it. It's of no relevance to diagnosis. So let's understand that the real problem here is not restlessness. It is, in fact, inhibition. There is a failure to develop appropriate inhibition, and it affects your behavior, it affects your words, it affects your mind and your thoughts. And we need to return to the idea, which we have gotten rid of, that it affects your emotions. By emotional impulsiveness, I mean this quickness to anger, to be easily excitable, to have low frustration tolerance, to be easily angered by things around you, and to display your emotions much more quickly than other people do. Now, this is not a mood disorder, even though it starts to look like one. Mood disorders are where you are generating too much emotion. What ADHD is a failure to regulate normal emotion. It is a self-regulation disorder. The feeling you're having is normal, that you are not moderating it is not. It is this inability to self-soothe, to self-calm, and to then moderate the emotion to be more acceptable for the context and for what you hope to accomplish here, the goal that is at hand. Your long-term welfare is at stake. Can you modify that emotion to be more socially acceptable, to be less costly, less damaging? That is as much a part of ADHD as anything else. And we are pushing the DSM-5 committees, there are several, to reincorporate emotional impulsiveness and this emotional dysregulation as being a part of this disorder. Now, by returning emotion into ADHD, it also helps families to understand some of the other life course risks. 50 to 70% of ADHD children are utterly rejected by close friendships by second grade. It is, in fact, one of the more devastating consequences of this disorder, is this inability to make and keep close, sustained friendships with other children. And it is heartbreaking for parents to see this happening, that their child is not as liked as other children, that the sleepovers, the going to the movies, and the other social events in which other children celebrate their peer relationships are shut off for this child. Why is it there? The single best predictor of peer rejection is that symptom, the emotional impulsiveness. Friends forgive you your distractibility, your forgetfulness, your working memory problems, and even your restlessness. They will not forgive your anger, your hostility, the quickness with which you emote to other people, because it is offensive. It is socially costly. So now we can begin to understand the numerous social problems that ADHD children are prone to, because it arises from this aspect of the inhibitory deficit. There are other things that it explains. I could do a whole hour and a half, as I did a month ago in Toronto, on the importance of emotion in ADHD. I won't go there. But suffice to say that it explains the road rage during driving, the job dismissals, which are not the result of inattentiveness, but of being too quick to anger, too quick to express raw emotion in the workplace, of which employers are not tolerant, especially if it occurs with a customer. And it also explains to us the marital difficulties and the parenting difficulties these children may be prone to, because the single best predictor of marital problems in the adult with ADHD is not distractibility, it is emotion. So we can begin to paint a better picture of understanding ADHD and its life course risks by understanding the nature of the inhibitory problem, and that it includes emotion as part of it. And that's just slide one. I've got 85 slides. Do you see why I'm concerned? 15 minutes to do a slide. All right, so we better get rolling here. But I thought you ought to know where we're going. And by the way, in case you hadn't noticed, I will not talk down to you today. I will treat you as if you were my colleagues, my students, my peers. Because I think that parents attend these things to learn. And that's not going to happen if I have to dumb this material down and it is also insulting. And I won't insult your intelligence either. You're knowledgeable people. I'll speak to you frankly using the scientific terminology. Oh, please. The second dimension, failing to develop on schedule, will appear about 2 to 3 years after the first. And this is known as the attention deficit, but it isn't. Here again, we have a misnomer. There are at least 6 or 7 kinds of attention and supporting networks in the human brain. They are not all disrupted by this disorder. What we want to know is which one. To help us with differential diagnosis, to help us tell ADHD from an anxiety disorder and from autism, and all the other psychiatric disorders, which all interfere with attention at some point in life, ADHD is not the only attention deficit. We need to be more precise. If someone comes to us and says, my child or I am inattentive, that is useless diagnostically. What I need to know is the nature of the inattentiveness. And we have now known for a decade that the inattentiveness that we see in ADHD is distinct from that produced by all other disorders, because it is most, I think, accurately described as a failure of persistence. The first attention problem is persistence toward a goal. Notice that this implies behavior, motivation, and the future. That is very important. The other forms of attention do not. ADHD is not a problem of perception, of filtering, of processing, of how the posterior part of our brain functions. It is a problem with the motor part of the brain, this frontal lobe. Can you sustain action toward a goal adequately to attain it? That implies a motivation deficit, and that is true. And it implies future-directed behavior, and that is true. ADHD is a failure to direct behavior forward in time. We cannot persist toward these delayed endpoints in life, the tasks, the goals, the things that need to get done. So persistence is deficit 1 in the area of attention. Now, to persist toward a goal, you must be able to resist distractions. But that, too, is not a perceptual issue. It is a motor issue. The person with ADHD does not have problems with perceiving distractors better than others. It is that they respond to distractors more than others. And that is an inhibitory failure, not a perceptual difference. You and I may all hear the noise in the kitchen. The person with ADHD is compelled to react to it. Oh, did you hear that? I guess they're washing dishes. Maybe I'll stop in and take a look. Did you know I was a dishwasher when I was back in college? That's how I earn my way. Do you see what's going on here? You all heard the dish, but it was irrelevant to what we're here to do today. But to the ADHD individual, the distraction is going to provoke a response, and the response can't be inhibited. And now they're off to the races, skipping from one thing to another to another. Now, there is a third aspect here that is impaired, but it is not one of attention. Most people, when they are distracted, re-engage the incompleted goal. The person with ADHD is far less likely to do so. And this has nothing to do with attention. This is working memory. So I would want a family to understand that there's more here than inattentiveness. There is a working memory disorder. And I would want them to know that working memory is one of the 5 special executive functions of the human brain, suggesting that ADHD is EFDD, executive function deficit disorder. Because working memory is where we remember what we're doing. It is remembering so as to do. It is consciously, effortfully holding in mind the what, the when of what we are doing. It's what you lose at my age and when you hit menopause. You do not lose memory. You lose working memory. You forget what you were doing, where you were going, what the goal was, the steps to the goal, how you were getting there. It is that that allows you to re-engage the incompleted goal, because you are holding in mind the goal. It is that which ADHD children and adults will lose. The goal is gone. It is forgotten. And now anything else compelling around them will capture their behavior. Hence, the symptom skips from one incompleted activity to another. The ability to re-engage a goal is a working memory disorder. And that's what they cannot do. And this begins to open the door on the possibility that the other 4 executive functions are impaired as well. More on that later. So let's understand that there are 3 interacting attentional problems, but that they are best thought of as executive deficits, not attention deficits. And they are the problem with persistence toward the future, resistance of distractions along the way, and working memory. And now you understand the nature of this attention problem from the one that's produced by anxiety and depression and autism and all the other disorders, including the learning disabilities, which have nothing to do with these. I would want families to understand that there is more to ADHD than just the inhibition and these attention and working memory problems. That at its heart, in its soul, it is a disorder of self-regulation, not one of attention. I think the biggest problem we have had as a group in convincing the general public about the seriousness of our children's disorder versus autism or schizophrenia or the other disorders is the very name itself is trivial. ADHD. Go to Starbucks. Good God. Have some caffeine. We got more serious fish to fry here in psychiatry than the fact that you just can't pay attention, right? Part of the reason that our disorder, that the name of this disorder, is so often pilloried in the media is because I think we misnamed it. Right? This is a developmental disorder of self-regulation, not of attention. And that is a serious disorder, as serious as manic depression, and in its own way, as autism. But it doesn't convey that to people if they understand it only as ADHD, as opposed to SRDD, a self-regulatory developmental disorder. So I would want families to understand the seriousness of this, that this isn't simply inattention. There are some profoundly unique human traits that are not emerging as they should in this individual. And if you'll understand that, you'll understand the bigger picture, the why of everything. If it's just an attention problem, why am I seeing impairment in virtually every domain in which this child is asked to function? That would not come from just inattentiveness, but it would come from an executive function disorder, a self-regulatory disorder. So I would want parents to understand that this is the essence of this disorder, self-regulation. What is that? It is, first of all, the ability to consciously, willfully choose to inhibit your behavior and then to engage in a series of self-directed actions. That is, after all, what self-control is. You start to do things to yourself. These are responses that are not directed at the world around you. They're directed at you, right? You're trying to change your behavior in some fundamental way. The second part of self-control that your child struggles is not just the stopping, but the thinking. The thinking is the self-directed activity, the stuff I am doing to myself. Why would I do these things to myself? To change my behavior from what it would otherwise be. And why would I do that? To change my future. Self-regulation is not just for short-term self-improvement. It's for long-term self-improvement. It's to see to your own welfare over the long term. Should you act this way, given the sustained or delayed consequences that lie ahead for you? That is what you must stop and think about, and that is what they don't stop and think about, the delayed consequences. So your child is not just inattentive. They cannot stop and engage in a series of self-directed actions that they will now use to modify and moderate their behavior so as to bring it in line with their long-term welfare, the future. And that's what your child is struggling so mightily with in their development. It's what the other kids are acquiring, and your child is so far behind in. I would want parents to understand something that the vast majority of the lay population does not understand. Self-control is not learned. It is not the result of your upbringing and how good your parents were. This is one of the most profound insights from our research on ADHD. ADHD, as we will see, is largely a neurogenetic disorder. But then let's pursue the implication. If that is true and ADHD is a self-regulation disorder, then self-control is largely neurogenetic in origin. That has a philosophically profound conclusion. The vast majority of variation in the people sitting in this room and their ability to manage their behavior is not from how they were raised. It is a part of who they are. It is a part of their neurogenetic gifts. And that is very stunning indeed. That our capacity for regulating ourselves is a neurobiological trait, not some socially learned phenomena that you just happen to pick up from your parents. So I would want them to know that ADHD, being a self-regulation disorder, is arising out of neurogenetic causes, and that this inability to direct behavior toward yourself comes from impairments in the following 5 executive abilities. And these have to do with brain development, not with training. It does not mean that training cannot enhance them. It means that they don't originate at the beginning in training, in the social environment. The social environment requires that they be there already, and then it will help to shape them to become more proficient. Think of your language ability. You didn't learn language, but it doesn't mean that you can't become more proficient in how you speak and how you write. But speaking and writing are not accounted for on the basis merely of training by your parents. You're going to develop a language no matter where you grow up. That is a neurobiological trait, and it unfolds as the brain unfolds. It is an instinct, and so is self-control. But self-control can be reduced to these 5 things. What are the 5 things you do to yourself? These are the things your child struggles to do. Number 1, can you stop? Can you wait? Because as Rabelais said in the novel Gargantua, which most of you have never read, I'm sure, but it is where this phrase comes from. Everything comes to those who can wait. The waiting is the tough part. You must build in a pause between the event and what you plan to do about it. And in ADHD, there is no pause. The event happens, and your response is up, out, done. It is as if there was no front part to the brain. It is as if you were like any other species with a spinal cord. Event, response. Or as in a Gary Larson cartoon, remember The Far Side? 2 amoebas, a husband and wife, talking to each other. One amoeba, the wife, of course, says to her husband, stimulus, response. Don't you ever think? Characterizes ADHD right there. Right? Don't you ever think? Once you stop, you will engage in 4 subsequent actions. The first is mental imagery. You will recall the past, and you will play a DVD of it in your head. You have a theater in your mind. It is your visual imagery system, the mind's eye. So your child not only cannot stop, they cannot visualize as well as other children. And what they do not visualize before they act is the past, the relevant past. Do you have experiences in this situation previously? If so, what would they have told you to do? Lay people call this hindsight, and the word sight is no coincidence. You are visually imagining your history. What does it have to say? And you lack hindsight. Now, this will lead to foresight. You look back to anticipate. What does ADHD lead to? No foresight. You are not thinking ahead because you weren't looking back either. Hindsight and foresight are the opposite sides of the same coin. Visual imagery. So you will not use your images of your past to tell you what to do. You will just do. And then by 5 years of age, you will get the 3rd executive deficit. You can't talk to yourself. Young children by 5 years of age are beginning to internalize their speech and use it on themselves. Just watch any first and second grade classroom and you will see this. If you have a 3 to 5 year old, you'll hear it. They're talking to themselves out loud most of the day, whether anyone is in the room or not. Listen to bedtime and you will hear what I mean. But over the next 10 years, this external voice gets directed to themselves and slowly made private and mental in its form. And so originates the voice in your head. And that voice in your head is there for one very important reason. It's to help control yourself. You start telling yourself what to do, and it starts to work. And now, any family I would explain this to would understand that not only can your child not stop, not only do they not have the mind's eye, they don't have the mind's voice. And what is there is very weak. It's not controlling them. So now you know why they can't do what you tell them to do. They can't follow instructions, they can't follow rules, they can't internalize the rules of the situation, because everything I have just said requires a voice in your head, and they don't have that. The next comes from the first three, and that is the mind's heart, the ability to manage your emotions so that they are more socially acceptable, so that they are consistent with your goals, not conflicting with your welfare. And so we will see the ADHD child, as we've already described them, easily frustrated, quick to anger, impatient, and just overall more excitable and more emotional than others. But what gets lost in this explanation is something more fundamental. Our emotions are our motivations. If you cannot manage your emotions, you cannot manage your motivation either. Because the fourth executive ability is the source of self-motivation. Self-motivation is the fuel tank for all future directed behavior. There is no getting ready for tomorrow if there is no self-motivation. So what has the ADHD child lost here? They cannot motivate themselves. What does that mean? It means that you will always be dependent on the environment around you and its immediate consequences for how hard and how long you can work. And if there are no consequences in that context, you cannot work. You cannot persist. You will not get it done. The fourth executive ability now explains to these parents why this child can play video games for hours and cannot do homework for more than a few minutes. Because the video game provides external, continuous, 100% consequences for interacting with it, and the homework does nothing. When a problem is solved on a sheet of paper, nothing happens. The consequences are delayed, and therein lies the trouble. So the corollary of this is if you want to see an ADHD person fail, you put him in any environment where there are no consequences, and I guarantee you failure. The work will not get done because the person cannot self-motivate. And this is not a choice, and this is not willful, and this is not a child who just could, if they wished, wake up tomorrow and smell the coffee and get busy and do the work. They cannot. This is an internal, neurogenetic, executive failure. You can't self-motivate like other people. So it doesn't matter what your goals are, you won't get there. Because self-motivation is required for all goal-directed action. The final executive ability, which will not emerge until late childhood in the person with ADHD, is the mind's playground. This is the ability to plan and problem solve. How many different possible options can you generate right now to get around this problem? This ability to simulate multiple possible future options is the highest executive function in humans. It is the source of all cultural innovation, but it originates in problem solving. How quickly in your mind can you think of multiple ways to overcome the problem you just encountered? And people with ADHD will struggle with this one as much as with the others. So if you want to understand ADHD as a parent, you have got to understand these are the 5 things that are delayed in this child. The ability to stop, to use visual imagery, to use your mind's voice, to use your mind's heart and emotion and motivation, and when called upon to do so, to simulate multiple possibilities when faced with a problem or when planning out what you hope to do. Planning and problem solving. Those are the 5 executive abilities. We know where they are in the frontal lobe. We know that ADHD children have lost all 5 of them. Actually, that's a bit of an overstatement. It's not that they don't have them. It's that they are quite delayed. And we will discuss the delay in a moment. So, ADHD leads you to act on impulse, not resist distraction. You are less able to think back about what you are doing, about the action that lies ahead. You cannot use your hindsight, and therefore your foresight is gone. You do not plan ahead. You live in the moment. This is going to rob you of your sense of time, because the sense of time comes from looking back to look ahead, looking across time and knowing where I'm going. You will not have a subjective sense of time, and that alone is going to be a devastating adult disability. You have the consummate disorder of time management. It's no wonder they're always late. You will not be able to talk to yourself, to reason with yourself, to ask yourself questions, and to remind yourself of the rules that are governing the immediate situation. And therefore, it doesn't matter what people say to you over and over and over again. You won't do it. No amount of nattering by your teacher or your mother will overcome the internal mind's voice deficit. You will not be able to use language as well as other people to regulate yourself. And that is going to also lead you to have a self-motivation problem and a problem with regulating your emotions and with self-soothing when you do become emotional. And then, as we've said, you will have trouble with planning and problem solving. So if you want to know the symptom list of ADHD, this is it. The DSM is but a mere superficial reflection of the most obvious symptoms of these 5 executive deficits. But to truly understand ADHD, you need to know that these 5 are all there, underneath. To refer to ADHD as inattention is to refer to autism as hand flapping and speaking funny. They are the most obvious symptoms of a failure to develop the ability to relate to others as special objects, as humans. And that is what autism really is underneath. The rest of it is just the most superficial set of symptoms. So I would want my family to understand the profundity of these deficits, because inattention hardly captures what is going wrong in development. Now, viewing ADHD as this neurogenetic or neurobiologic disorder of self-regulation brings with it some very important insights I would want you and families who I counsel to understand, not the least of which is this one. This is ADHD writ large. It's always now. ADHD is, to summarize it in a single phrase, time blindness. People with ADHD cannot deal with time, and that includes looking back to look ahead to get ready for what's coming at you. So the individual with ADHD is kind of living in the now, and wherever the now goes, they are being pulled along by the nose, wherever it goes. I'll give you an example from our adults clinic. It's rather funny, but it wasn't to his wife. This couple came into our office in Massachusetts once, and she said, "Let me tell you what it's like living with this guy, because it's like having a 4th child, actually. This is what happened last weekend." She says, "If you can't do something about this, I'm leaving him." Here's what happened. He went out to mow the yard. He wheeled the lawnmower out of the garage, and the tank was empty. So he reached for the fuel can. It was empty, too. So he threw it in the back of the Ford Explorer and headed down to the little Quickie Mart. And while he was filling up the gas can, his buddy pulls in his Ford Explorer and says, "You know it's opening day on the trout stream. What do you say we go fish a little bit?" And so the guy hops in his buddy's Explorer, and they go fly fishing. And they are out for 6 hours. And then they get thirsty and decide to stop off at a pub for a beer. So now they're at the little local tavern. This is a true story, by the way, because within an hour, the state police had found his car still running in an open gas can at the Quickie Mart. And he finally wandered home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you see what happens? Doesn't matter what your plans were, what your goals were. The now is more compelling than the information you're holding in mind. and you will get pulled along by the now. You are time blind. Because if we had to summarize in a single sentence, what is the purpose of the frontal lobe to humans? It is to organize your behavior across time in anticipation of what is coming at you, the future. So ADHD creates a blindness to time, or technically, to be more accurate, a nearsightedness to the future.
Can you say that again?
I can only be eloquent once. No. This is extemporaneous. I'm not. Okay, ADHD, right, is at its heart a blindness to time, or technically, to be exact, it is a nearsightedness to the future. Just as people who are nearsighted can only read things close at hand, people with ADHD can only deal with things near in time. The further out the event lies, the less they are capable of dealing with it. And this is why everything is left to the last minute, because they only deal with last minutes. That's all they perceive, that's all they deal with, that's all they organize to. And so their life is a series of one crisis after another, all of which were avoidable because people prepared. And they didn't. They weren't ready on time, in time, over time, with what they needed at that time. Note the word time. Right? So ADHD is destroying the timing and timeliness of human behavior. That is a very important thing for parents to understand. Because while a 3-year-old does not have to have a sense of time, a 30-year-old does. And one of the most devastating deficits in adult life that ADHD produces is a disruption in the fabric of time. They can't cope with it as well as others. Now, this ability to organize across time comes with the capacity to build pyramids of behavior, from little behaviors to the bigger behaviors above them to the bigger goals above them. All human behavior can be organized into a hierarchy. Think about planning a wedding. Can you imagine the hierarchy you would have to create? The decision trees, and when they would have to be done, and when you would have to book the church and get the minister and get the flowers and book the reception hall. And all of those come with little subroutines like picking up a telephone and calling your minister, right? It's the frontal lobe that allows you to organize all of those toward the single overarching purpose, the wedding. And that's what ADHD destroys. People with ADHD cannot hierarchically organize behavior. And so they are accustomed to dealing with behaviors in little fits and starts. But they can't glue those together as well as others to create the bigger goal to the bigger goal all the way up. And that's why you see a short attention span. It's not really a short attention span. It's the inability to organize behavior across time into a hierarchy. The ability to look ahead is called intention. So ADHD is actually IDD. It's intention deficit disorder. Because it doesn't matter what your intentions are, you're not going to do them. So, you can head out the door for school in the morning and promise your mother that you will not be put in timeout again. You really will get it right today. You will behave yourself. You will not fight with the other kids. You will finish your work, and you mean it sincerely. But within an hour, your mother's getting the usual call that you're in timeout and that you're disruptive and they need to come and get you, right? Notice what happens. Your intentions are not the problem. And it's not insincerity. It's the inability to organize around those intentions. So ADD is really IDD. Now, I want you to understand something. Your brain can be split into two pieces. The back part is where you acquire knowledge. The front part is where you use it. The back part is knowledge. The front part is performance. ADHD, like a meat cleaver, just split your brain in half. So it doesn't matter what you know. You won't use it. You have what we call in psychology a performance disorder. Performance disorders have nothing to do with skill. You have all the skills other people your age possess, but you can't use them. Because you see, it's the executive system where the rubber meets the road, where what you know gets applied in every day what you do. And ADHD is a disorder of doing what you know. It is not a disorder of knowing what to do. And that is a very important thing I want families to understand as well. Your child, unless they were raised in a zoo or in a very impoverished area or were adopted out of some far-fetched, war-torn, undeveloped country, has all the information and knowledge that the other kids their age have. What they can't do is use it. It is the application of what you know that this disorder robs you of. So you can be the smartest person on the planet, and you're still going to do some pretty stupid things. Because it's not what you know, it's doing it. So I would want parents to understand that that is a very profound disturbance in a person's behavior. But it arises out of neurology and genetics, and out of this is going to come a very important view of what to do about this disorder. The first thing this is going to mean is to stop teaching so many damn skills. Because you're approaching this child as if he's stupid, right? Oh, he doesn't have any friends. I guess he doesn't know social skills, so we'll take him down to the local clinic and we'll enroll him in a 12-week social skills camp, about which we'll probably pay $50 to $100 a session. Or we'll send him to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where there's a nice summer social skills camp that was advertised in Chad's Attention magazine. There is. It's probably a very nice camp. I don't mean to belittle it. I'm just telling you it will do no good, right? Well, now let's understand something. I might want to send a child to camp just to have fun, right? It's part of the quality of life. Go, have a nice summer. But if I'm sending you to camp with the belief that you're going to come back a person with better social skills, you are sadly mistaken, right? So we have got to stop putting all the eggs in the skill training basket, because that's not where the problem is, right? We have got to spend more time changing the point of performance. The point of performance is where you should be using what you know, and you're not. And the only way to treat a performance disorder is to change that point. This means that all treatment, if it is going to work at all, must be at the point of performance, the place in your life where you're not using what you already know. And if the intervention isn't done there, it's useless. That has been a major finding of the last decade. The only treatments that work are treatments that modify those natural points in the environment where the problems are occurring. And if those aren't modified, nothing done away from that site will do anything. So you can do pull-out services, you can go to summer or to social skills camps, you can go to special ed, you can come and see me for once a week for psychotherapy. And everything I just said will have no generalization or maintenance. Won't go anywhere, won't even leave this room. Howard Abakoff tells a beautiful story of the social skills group he ran, and on the day they covered anger management and sharing, he opened the door to the room and there was a fist fight in the hall by the elevator over who was going to push the button. So much for your anger management, right? You see what happens? You were focusing on knowledge. Oh, let me teach you how to share and cooperate. And you miss the point. This is not information deficit disorder. Right? This is performance deficit disorder. So you got to change those points of performance. If he has no friends on the playground, you're going to have to do something at that school. If you got trouble with homework, it's the kitchen table, honey. It's not my office. We need to rearrange where the homework is being done to help them show what they know. As I've already said, this point of view also then makes us look very differently at psychopharmacology as a form of neurogenetic treatment. Now, everything I have just said could be used by any parent to come up to me and say, my child got thrown out of school yesterday for some misbehavior. Would you please go to school and get him reinstated? He should not be held accountable for these consequences, right? Because after all, didn't you just say it's a neurogenetic disorder? So let me help you understand something about what I've just said. ADHD does not cause a problem with consequences. The problem is with time. It was the delay to the consequence that disabled you. Which means that I'm going to do the opposite of what this mother is asking. Increase accountability, not decrease it. Increase the frequency, immediacy, the salience, and the timing of consequences. People with ADHD need more accountability, not no accountability. In fact, this view of ADHD as an executive disorder would tell you that if you argue for no accountability, you will make this disorder worse, not better. Because the problem is the delay, and all natural consequences of any importance are delayed. What does that mean? We are going to have to use behavioral treatments, the BMOD programs, the tokens, the charts, the cards, the Smurf stickers, whatever. What is their purpose? Their purpose is not to teach. That is a misnomer, if you will. Their purpose is to sprinkle artificial consequences into these delays in the natural environment in order to increase your accountability. So they're not teaching anything. They are making up for the accountability deficit disorder. BMOD does not teach anything to ADHD children, really. What it does is improve the motivation to show what you know. By making you more accountable, more often, around you, you have less ADHD. By excusing you from the consequences, you'll be more ADHD. So I want you to understand something. There are two reasons why we would tell you as a family to do behavior modification. One is instructional. This is why we teach families of autistic and mentally retarded children behavior modification, to teach their children things they don't know. But the second purpose you would do BMOD for has nothing to do with instruction. It's motivational, to make up for the motivation deficit disorder that this disorder produces. And so if you do BMOD for its motivational value, you can't stop it. Because if you pull it, you've pulled the motivation. If you do BMOD for its instructional purpose, you can pull it. Because once they've acquired the skill, they'll use the skill and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, do you see a contrast here? Most parents and nearly all teachers I deal with believe that BMOD is for instructional value. That's why we do it for ADHD, which is why whenever you go into a school and you try to teach a teacher to set up a token system, the first question out of his mouth is, how long do I have to do this? When will he internalize the program? And my answer is, never. As long as he's in your class, you will have to arrange artificial consequences to replace the delayed ones. And if you don't do that, he will not work for you. So I want you to think about token systems and star charts and all behavior modification as being equivalent to a ramp that comes into this building. That ramp is there to make people who are physically disabled less motorically impaired. They can get into the building in their wheelchairs or whatever other devices they're using. But would you ever say to such a person, after 30 days of entering this building successfully using the ramp, you know the punchline, right? Can I take the ramp away? Have they internalized the ramp? Well, of course not. The ramp was never for teaching, right? The ramp is a prosthesis. A prosthesis is an artificial means of reducing the disabling consequences of your disorder. It is not to train you up into anything. No amount of using a ramp is going to take the ramp away. And no amount of BMOD is going to take the BMOD away. These individuals will always need more frequent consequences around them than will other people in order to perform at the same level. It's just a general corollary of ADHD. So what else have we learned about ADHD? Well, if all treatment is at that point of performance, and if at that point of performance I'm trying to arrange a prosthesis, a prosthetic environment to reduce the impairment from the disability, right, then it means that the caregivers are the most important people in the treatment plan, the parents and the teachers. It is their compassion for disabled people and their willingness to make these prosthetic accommodations that is the heart of any successful intervention. And absent that compassion, no amount of quality in a good professional or therapist is going to change that. You have to make those people stakeholders. You've got to get them invested. And if they're not, you're in trouble. It doesn't matter how good a clinician you are. So it's best to look at ADHD, I would be telling these families in my office, like we look at diabetes. Largely a chronic disorder, and our goal is to manage it, to create a reduction in the symptoms, the purpose of which is the avoidance of secondary harm. We do not treat diabetes to get rid of it. We treat it to prevent what happens to you if you don't manage your diabetes, because you will go blind, and your heart muscle will atrophy, and you are at risk for sudden death, and you will get gangrene, and you may have your toes or fingers or other appendages eventually amputated if we do not manage your insulin levels. That is what we try to prevent. But no amount of treating diabetes is ever designed to get rid of the diabetes. And I think ADHD is a very good analogy. I think we manage ADHD to prevent the secondary harms, which I'm about to show you. We don't manage ADHD to get rid of it. We manage it so that you don't experience those more heinous consequences. So by changing the environment, you're going to be able to help compensate for the impaired executive abilities. Now, the ADHD view of ADHD, the attention view, does not tell you what to do. Not one whit does it guide me. If you tell me somebody is inattentive, I don't know what to do for them. What, more coffee, as I said? But if you tell me somebody has an executive disorder, I will give you 5 things to do immediately at any point in performance. Goodness, it's 3:30. Can I give you a break right after this one? Okay. Number 1, your child cannot stop and hold things in mind. So don't make them. You need to use external, physical forms of information, which means sticky notes, signs, symbols, charts, cues, reminders. The issue here is not the what, it's the why. You must find a substitute for working memory. And that means something external. The information, whatever it is that is key for you to remember right here, right now, needs to be outside of your brain, in the visual field. You have got to externalize, is the phrase for that, the information that other people are holding in mind. It's what we are doing after age 55 and women in perimenopause. We are using a lot of sticky notes, let me tell you. Because I'm 59 years old and I already have a little ADHD working memory disorder, as do most women. By the way, it hits women harder than men, but it hits us both. Nevertheless, we're all running around with lists. What was I doing? My wife even has a digital memory recorder in her car so that when she's out and she has to remember something, she dictates it in there so she can listen back and remember what the heck she was supposed to buy at the shopping center. You see what we're all doing? Making up for a working memory deficit. You need to do the same thing with ADHD. If you're an adult with ADHD, you should not be going anywhere without a paper journal in your pocket with a pen. Because anything you agree to do or anything others ask you to do is to be immediately written in that journal. And that journal is welded to your body. That is your working memory. Use it. And by the way, we find journals are better than digital devices because they lose the devices and they don't remember to turn them on and they don't remember to dictate into them. So as good as those things may sound and as high-tech as they are, the good old paper and pencil notebook seems to do the job, okay? And if I were you, I would even have it on a chain like a motorcycle gang member has his wallet. It is there from sunup to sundown. Man, when you put your pants on, that is in it all the time, right? And now you have a working memory. You have no internal clock. So if anything involves time, there must be a timer. There must be something physical outside of you that signals the passage of time. For young children, cooking timers are great, but there are various other devices, including watches that beep every 5 minutes and vibrators that you can buy at the addwarehouse.com that have digital timers built in, and you can set them to just vibrate in your pocket every so often. I don't care what the stimulus is. This is the why, people, not the what. Right? The why is you have no sense of time. So if I give you something that involves time, I have got to give you a timer. And if this extends more than just a few minutes to a half hour, you are going to need a day planner, a Palm Pilot, or some other means of keeping track of time. A week-at-a-glance calendar is not a bad thing either. But you are going to become timer and calendar dependent, addicted, so that you can organize your life as well as other people who don't need to rely on those things so much. You cannot see the future coming at you. So if there is something you've agreed to do over time, if this child has a book report or a science project, you are going to break that into baby steps and do a piece a day. You are not going to point at the future and keep harping about summer reading. Have you done your summer reading? We've got that book report that's due next week. Have you done that? Right? No, we are going to take the book report and you are going to read 3 pages today. You are going to write 4 sentences today, and I will give you 15 tokens right now. And that's how we're going to get this done. We are going to break the future into pieces and do a piece a day. And stop pointing at the future because you can't organize to the future. That is your disability. That's like going onto an inpatient unit at the psychiatric hospital and saying, God, these people hallucinate around here. What's going on? It's an inpatient unit. They're schizophrenics. What did you think, right? You should not be shocked that you have to break things down for people who have a time management disorder. And so you should do it for people with ADHD as well. Break the future into pieces. By the way, what does ERO mean on this? It means that the future comes at you in 3 pieces. The events that are coming toward you, the responses you prepare, and the consequences, the outcomes of what you're doing. ERO. So here's the lesson I would want this family to understand. If those E's and R's and O's are kept close together, you don't need a frontal lobe. And ADHD people can do them. That's a video game. But the minute you stretch these things apart with time, like a book report, you've got to read this book, your report's due in 30 days, it'll take a week to grade all the papers. I just put a month between the E and the R, and a week between the R and the O. And if you have ADHD, you're disabled, big time. So the solution is to get the E's, R's, and O's back together. And that means baby steps. Little ERO bridges across time. And that's how you would do a future assignment. Now, how are we going to deal with the 4th executive function deficit, the emotional, motivational one? It means all motivation is external. We already talked about this, which means I am going to have something in it for you if you are going to persist. So stop whining, stop complaining why you have to offer something for this child to work. The reason you don't offer it to other children is they have internal motivation. ADHD children do not. To borrow a phrase from Stephen Covey, please think win-win. A win for them, not just a win for you. And that means you are going to have to drop in the points, the tokens, the privileges, the sex, the drugs, the money, and the car. My medication's wearing off, I think. The last executive function, which is mental play, it's the ability to manipulate the contents of your mind in creative ways, to invent multiple possibilities. Very hard for these people. This is why they can't do mental arithmetic as well as others. It's why they can't do digit span backward as well as others. It's why they have trouble playing the little musical game Simon. Working memory. But if you can't hold things in working memory, then you can't manipulate your working memory. And that's where the source of planning and problem solving are coming from. So what do? Well, we're going to take the same word we did before. Externalize. We're going to make problem solving manual, physical. You get to do it with your hands. So let's take math problems. I'm going to give you a bunch of marbles, a number line, and a abacus or a calculator. But the first 3 would suffice, right? You're going to do math with your hands, the way it originally was done. I'm not going to ask you to do arithmetic in your head. You're going to find that to be difficult. You need a crutch. You need an external prosthesis to help you with your math. Now, what if this is a verbal problem or task, like you've got to write a story or an essay or something? I'm going to give you a stack of 3x5 file cards, and I want you to sit down and put your mind on dump. I want you to think of any idea you can come up with that has to do with this subject. Go. I want a thought per card. I don't care what order, I don't care what sequence, just let your mind run wild. But just give me a thought a card. Now I'm going to take your cards and reorganize them, and now we've got them physical. And now we can create the story and the plot line. And if you do this on a laptop computer in Word, you can even move it around and spell check and cut and paste and do all that neat stuff because it's now external. Your ideas have become physical. And that's the secret here. Make the mental information physical in some way, and then they might be able to do it. This may explain why more people with ADHD wind up in the trades than in any other professions. I used to think it was because the trades don't require as much advanced education. I now think it's probably also the fact that it's manual. Whether you're a carpenter, a plumber, a landscaper, a bricklayer, a tuner, electrician, a tuner of pianos, I meant to say, or others, you are doing something manual. And that may matter. We'll see. Lastly, ADHD rarely occurs alone. ADHD children are at risk for all of these other disorders. In fact, 80% of ADHD children and adults will have one of these other disorders, and 50% will have at least 2 of these other disorders. So seeing ADHD by itself is very rare. Seeing ADHD link up with a few other disorders is not rare. It's very common. And so I would want families to understand that we may have to treat other disorders, not just the ADHD. The ADHD may be one problem, and it may be the biggest, most impairing problem. but it's not the only problem that we may have to deal with. And on that note, we are going to give you a 10-minute break. You will be called back at 10 minutes to 4 because I got 15 other ideas I want to share with you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks so much.